afternoon, or morning, depending on where you're coming from. Thank you for coming to the webinar today. This is Conducting Participatory Research in Prisons and is the second of our two-part webinar series on findings from the Prison Research and Innovation Initiative. I'm Alice Galley, and I'm a policy associate here at the Urban Institute's Justice and Safety Division. And I've had the pleasure of being the project manager on this initiative over the last 4 years, which is led by David Pitts and Evelyn McCoy. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. This event is being recorded and the recording will be posted online afterwards. Speaker biographies and related materials are available online, including the recording from the first part of the webinar series, and that is also going to be linked in the chat. All participants are muted, but you can type your questions or comments in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen at any time. So, diving right into things, I'll be talking about the Prison Research and Innovation Network, or PRIN, which is a consortium of 5 state prison systems dedicated to conducting participatory research on prison living and working conditions and piloting data-driven strategies for change. This project started in 2019 and ran for about 5 years and was funded by Arnold Ventures. In each of the 5 states, we partnered with a Department of Correction, one of their facilities, and a local research organization. The project could not have happened without the work of these local research partners and DOCs, so we want to give huge thanks to each of them. That would be Colorado, Delaware, Missouri, Iowa, and Vermont. Zooming out a little bit, why did we do this project in the first place? The state of prisons in the United States, we have about 1.2 million people incarcerated in state and federal prisons. We have 180,000 state corrections officers, and negative health outcomes have been documented for those directly involved in prisons. We spend about $64 billion annually on state prisons, and in addition to those directly involved, many others are indirectly affected by the state of the US prison system. Despite their massive societal impact, prisons remain poorly understood institutions with limited research on living and working conditions. So to better understand prisons and these conditions, this project aimed to take a participatory research approach. Participatory research is an approach founded on the idea of nothing about us without us. Each step of the research is created with and for the people most directly affected by the conditions being studied. It has central tenets of power sharing, so distributing control and decision-making authority, empowered participation, and action. Participatory research elevates research subjects to co-researchers and requires that all co-researchers work to share control and decision-making power to identify the issues that require change. And how this differs from traditional research is, instead of researchers coming in and studying people as passive subjects, participatory research engages the communities as active partners who help design research questions, who participate in data collection and interpretation, who share expertise based on their lived experiences, and who collaborate on developing the solutions to address these problems. Some examples of participatory research are on the screen here. So this is not the first project that has used participatory research in prisons, but has added to this body of work. And to note, pure participatory research is very challenging in prison settings due to the inherent power dynamics, the institutional restrictions, and the hierarchical structures. But participatory approaches can still empower participants and create meaningful change when implemented thoughtfully. And I'll be talking today about how participatory research was used in this project and was ethically important and practically useful. We find that including all voices produces higher quality research because it's grounded in the actual experiences of those living the conditions being studied. So the components of the Prison Research and Innovation Network include annual climate surveys co-designed by participants, where participants wrote questions and interpreted results, participatory innovation development, research councils of staff and incarcerated people guiding the work, on-site prison research and innovation managers. So this was a DOC employee who was embedded in the facility and liaised with the research teams to make sure that the project was getting the face time on the ground and building rapport within the facilities. Cross-site data collection and evaluation. There were peer-to-peer data collection and recruitment strategies, collaborative data analysis sessions, community-driven innovation development, and regular feedback loops and town halls that took place in different sites in the network. So to learn how this research actually worked in each site, we conducted a process evaluation. For the process evaluation, we being the Urban Institute, conducted 112 stakeholder interviews of 100 unique participants across all 5 sites, and we had 4 years of observation data and documentation to supplement this as well. A little bit about our interview participants. 33% were incarcerated people, 25% were corrections staff, so that's both security and non-security staff. 30% were steering committee members, meaning research partners at those organizations, facility leadership, the innovation managers who I mentioned previously, folks who were driving the designs of the project on the ground. And 12% were executive committee members. So these are state level actors who had lighter touch on the driving of the project, but were keeping the project situated in the larger state level prison reform context. I would be remiss if not to mention that this project did take place during COVID-19, so understandably there were major disruptions like facility lockdowns, there was the staffing crisis, and serious health consequences for both incarcerated folks and staff. There was also restricted access to facilities, including for researchers, so they were not able to be in the facilities as much as they had planned at the outset of this project. Okay, so that brings us to some of the findings. So, what made PRIN different? We heard from our interviews that the participatory research component is actually what made PRIN different. These core, the core principle here is elevating incarcerated people and staff as experts in their own experiences, not just the research subjects, was really central to making people feel ownership of the work, and people could tell that the questions came from people who really knew what was going on inside the facilities. Interviewees reported that response rates they felt were higher because of the participatory research than they would have been if the surveys had not been developed in this way. And they also felt that the consistent engagement with the project from the research partners built this transparency and made them feel that that their voices were being listened to. We learned about how incarcerated people experienced PRIN. Interviewees expressed high engagement and motivation to be involved with the project. Incarcerated folks had a time available to participate in the project, more so than staff. They also had time to wait for next steps, which reduced engagement in the project. Folks felt like the change was slow, that they were waiting around when things were not happening as quickly as they would like. Interviewees mentioned a desire to give back, to improve the prison environment for fellow incarcerated people, for fellow staff or for staff as well. And by participating in the project, we're doing so. Universally, incarcerated people did support these data collection efforts and want to be involved there to make sure that the prison conditions were being, people were aware of them and helping to figure out ways to change. Correctional staff's experience with PRIN was a little bit different. Correction staff were overworked because of the staffing crisis, the staff shortage. Interviewees expressed fear of retaliation from management. They feared that saying something that they thought might get back to them would be challenging and a reason not to participate. They were skeptical of outsiders, people coming in who didn't understand corrections and misinterpreting or not understanding where they were coming from. So these all impacted their willingness to participate, their engagement with the project. They also cited previously negative research experiences. So having researchers come in who didn't listen to them or prioritize the desires and statements of incarcerated people over the desires and experiences of correctional staff. So staff engagement did require intensive relationship building, flexible scheduling to meet staff where they were at physically and where they were at emotionally, and demonstrating genuine respect for their expertise. And the research partners in this project did employ a number of strategies to try to address these things. According to interviews, PRIN was the culture shift. There were incarcerated people reporting feeling heard for the first time, improved communication between staff and incarcerated people, and an environment where trying new things became acceptable. There was this license, this permission to say maybe we should take a chance on trying a new way of doing things that we haven't done before. There was also some reduced skepticism in this environment of risk aversion, prioritizing safety, prioritizing security. This calculated risk became people became more willing to try these things. So key finding here is the PRIN process itself created the culture change, not just the more physical, tangible innovations that also came out of the project. And now we have a couple quotes that demonstrate these things that I've been mentioning. Of course, this was not all smooth sailing. There were a number of obstacles encountered, including funding constraints. So did the legislature, what kind of budget did the legislature allocate for the prison system? How much is that to a specific prison, and how transferable are those funds within within what folks wanted to do with that money? There was bureaucratic red tape, so approvals to questions on the survey, approvals for changes to be made. If there's a change to the physical plant, the structure of the facility, is that going to be possible? Who owns that building? These were just some examples of red tape. Resistance to change at all levels. Competing priorities. So staff had a number of demands on their time. They were overworked. There were just not enough staff at that time. There were competing priorities between stakeholder groups. So if incarcerated folks wanted one thing and facility leadership wanted another, and within stakeholder groups. So figuring out which areas to prioritize, even within the group of correction staff who wanted to see changes, what was most important to prioritize. And then last but very much not least, is that change is slow, research is slow, and that led to disengagement and less buy-in. And you can see here a steering committee member is talking about the red tape that made the project a bit challenging. So one last point that I wanted to make from the data that came out of the process evaluation was the critical role of project champions. So that role I mentioned before, the embedded prison research and innovation manager, was essential. It was a make or break role when the person had a number of characteristics that made them successful. This person was able to create buy-in on the ground, create trust, and familiarity. People felt more willing to participate. They felt more trusting. They also trusted that things would happen in the project. But when the wrong person was in the role, it was highly detrimental to the project. Things weren't able to get pushed forward, and there was a lack of trust. So people understandably wanted to engage far less. And lastly, some key lessons for participatory research in prisons. Treat facility leadership as its own stakeholder group, having all of the voices in conversation at the table is very important. The participatory approach is bottom up by design, but not including facility leadership as its own group, but including facility leadership as its own group adapts the dynamic to operate in this top-down environment. And importantly, in doing so, we do not overweight facility leadership's seat at the table, but to be in conversation when developing these priorities and communicate about demands each group is facing and figuring out priorities that way. Small visible successes build momentum and trust. This was especially important in the beginning to demonstrate that people's voices were being heard, that change can happen as we built up to some bigger changes over time. Consistency, showing up reliably, showing up for about 4 years in these facilities, these research partners were able to overcome some of the skepticism that they were just there to take data and leave. So this was very important. This was a very important component to the participatory research. Open and honest communication about constraints and possibilities reduces the feeling of overpromising and the feelings of false promises being made, even if that was most definitely not the intention. This open and honest communication opens the conversation for why there might be constraints. Incarcerated people and staff both reported feeling left in the dark about a lot of decisions. They'd hear nothing from facility leadership or hear a no with no explanation, and this would build resentment and confusion. So just opening that communication about why something is not possible seemed to be very beneficial for conducting this research. And flexibility is very important. Pure participatory research, like I mentioned, is near impossible in prison settings, but with the proper intentionality and transparency, participants can still exercise the agency that they do have to collectively drive toward change. So if you are interested in learning more, we have 2 reports coming out later this month that go into detail on the process evaluation findings and the cross-site climate survey results. And with that, I will welcome my fellow participants to the stage, and we're going to hear from some folks who were involved in the Prison Research and Innovation Network. Hello, welcome.
Good morning.
Hi.
So we can start off with some introductions. Can you please share your name and your role on the PRIN project and what PRIN looked like in your site? We can start with Monir and then pass it down the line.
Okay, my name's Monir Wood, and I'm an incarcerated resident at Sterling Correctional Facility in Colorado. And initially, my role in PRIN was just an incarcerated resident who took part in answering a pretty comprehensive survey in 2021 that in my should I answer this now, Alice? Yeah, okay. So I answered a pretty comprehensive survey that covered a lot of different things that had to do with prison conditions, my relationship with staff, um, thoughts about safety and access to programs, and also recreation. And then in 2022, I played an observational role in what they called a data walk, which was after after the initial survey in 2021. They set up a big event in our gym where we walked through and saw all the survey results and people's opinions, and were able to post opinions and more thoughts about the survey results afterwards. And then in the summer of 2023, I came on as a PRIN in an incarcerated advisory role to the PRIN project here in Sterling, when Miss Book became the PRIM, the PRIN manager here at this facility. And so since then, I've been involved in a number of like virtual events, interviews, distribution of surveys, and a number of events with our PRIN advisory group, which was both staff and inmates, where we try to do like public information campaigns where we try to let our facility know what was going on with PRIN and the current happenings, more information about survey results, also to improve relationships and communications between staff and incarcerated residents. And then we even collaborated together to propose an internal, so anticipating that PRIN was going to end one day. We wanted to build another similar structure after PRIN was gone out of facility to still do surveys and to try to improve conditions for both staff and inmates. And so that was my role.
Thank you. We can shift to Miles.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Miles Strid. I'm the Director of Adult Institutions for the state of Missouri, so oversee the operation of our 19 correctional facilities. So PRIN for me, actually, my first exposure to PRIN was taking over as the warden at the Moberly Correctional Center here in Missouri. And I think what it looked like to me, is to best describe it, is I initially thought it was going to be more like an offender council, where we met with residents and staff and talked about what we could do to make things better for residents. But in reality, it was totally different. For me, PRIN was a way for staff and residents to join together and come up with innovations that improved, as Monir mentioned, living and working conditions at the facility. So it was very valuable to me, and I know we'll get into some of the details as we get further into the webinar. But
Perfect. And Emily?
Hi, I'm Emily Rowe. I'm a research associate at the Center for Drug and Health Studies at the University of Delaware. I started on the PRIN project as a graduate research assistant in 2021. I eventually started working more and more on the project with Dr. Daniel O'Connell and Dr. Christy Vischer here, and eventually became kind of the project director as it kind of moved forward. So I kind of organized research committee meetings, helped support in different ways with developments of the surveys, data analysis, all that good stuff that we can talk a little bit more about as we get through the questions. But yeah, that was kind of my role.
Great. Thank you all. So we've heard a lot about how community engagement can be challenging in a prison setting. How would you say that innovation advisors and council members, if that was the case, in your site, ensure that everyone could share their opinions safely and easily? And how did that work in your site? We can start with Monir to speak about the your experience, and then go to Emily.
Okay. As far as the community, ensuring that everybody could share their stuff, their opinions safely. As far as I understood, as far as I seen that, obviously all the surveys and all the discussions maintain total anonymity and confidentiality. So I never really saw, and I never really saw that broken. And so I did. So everybody, to me, at least, especially on the resident side, everybody there was pretty willing to participate and answer questions and be involved in engagement. Whether we had put up a sign saying, "Hey, come talk to us," or whether we initiated engagement with them, it was pretty active engagement. And of course, everybody has opinions, so so we had no problem getting those opinions about the various things that were asked on the surveys, and getting feedback and stuff like that. A couple times I did hear like staff have some kind of trepidation and hesitation out of thinking that if they participated with candid answers to the researchers in their surveys or any of the interviews and stuff like that, they thought that maybe that might be used against them by management. But again, I never saw any of those fears manifest themselves or anything like that. So that was kind of my experience.
Yeah, I can hop in there too then. As an outside researcher, you never really know what you're walking into on a day-to-day basis in a correctional facility. And I'm sure, as my other panelists know, being in them much more frequently than I do, like, you have to be aware of fears of retaliation and other, confidential kind of conversations. So we really tried our best to maintain that confidentiality and anonymity around our participants, around our research committees. For our incarcerated research committee, one of the things we really emphasized with them is if there was an officer in the room with us, it was an officer that folks respected and trusted and felt comfortable sharing opinions around. And we really put in a lot of groundwork to make sure that we had an officer in there that folks liked and trusted and felt comfortable being in the room. For staff, we realized that there also is this fear of retaliation that is very much present in the correctional setting among staff. So we really tried our best to have conversations with staff members when other staff members maybe weren't present. We kind of had to shift our creation of staff research committees for a variety of challenges that we can talk about later if we would like to. But we ended up doing what we called staff walkabouts. So we would walk around the facility and talk to staff kind of in their position where they were at. So when we did that, it was myself, another graduate researcher, and our prison innovation manager, Dana Belfiore. And we kind of were really intentional about not walking around with other officers or leadership with us, so that people felt they could freely and openly share opinions with us without that fear of someone else overhearing or maybe something being misinterpreted. So those were really how we kind of tried to create this safety and kind of this aura of anonymity and confidentiality that we thought was really important and was really important for our staff in incarcerated populations.
I think that leaves it to my turn, doesn't it? So I'll say this, obviously, when you're talking about the prison setting, you've got some differences between staff and residents, right? There are some challenges to try to bridge that gap, and trust is really important. So I think the first thing that Missouri did very well, we identified those influencers in both populations. So trying to pick residents that we knew were both had good credibility and could influence the rest of the population, as well as finding staff that carried themselves respectfully, were respected by the resident population and also their peers. And so we got those two groups assembled, and we really started having them work on innovations after the surveys were complete together with their peers and trying to come up with things that would mean something to both population. And then they did presentations in front of each other about what they wanted to change inside of the facility. And so I think just that open platform where they were able to tell each other what they wanted to do and things that they wanted to change made a huge difference in building that trust. So that's really what we focused on, was making sure we had the right people in the room, allowing them to work independently to develop some ideas and then presenting them to each other. And that's really where it all started. Kind of after the surveys were done, we started just making things happen. And once we did that, and both parties saw that, like, hey, we can make recommendations and have ideas and stuff actually gets done with it. Then we brought them together. We actually had innovation advisor meetings with staff and residents at the same table. And there's a question later I'm going to save this one for, but they came up with some very innovative ideas that I wouldn't have initially thought impacted both communities. Like I wouldn't have thought that they both wanted. So yeah, that's kind of how we approached it. And I think it did, we've heard a lot of people talking about how there had to be some confidentiality in those conversations. But I can tell you, when we got them at the same table, those conversations opened up and some trust really started to become, it was evident in the conversation. So, yeah.
Miles, I'll ask you to expand on that. Like, you've spoken about these ideas that folks came up with. Do you know much about the process of how staff and incarcerated people participated to like develop these ideas and implement the changes? I know you mentioned those presentations, but more early discussions and later implementation.
Absolutely. And so hopefully I answer your question. So what happened, we had an amazing research team from University of Missouri. We did the surveys and the survey information was compiled. And it's, anyone that sat down with a group of residents and asked like, hey, what can we do better? You're going to get a laundry list, right? So we had hundreds of things that we could have done better. And the same thing from the staff side. So they sat down and they started to formulate all those recommendations into themes. And so let's say for one thing we saw, like a theme was residents and staff, because we offer staff the same food as we do our residents, wanted more healthy choices in food. And so, of course, that came in the form of, we hate this food item, we love this food item, we want more of this. So we developed those into themes, and then we started to sit them down and have them work on those themes. I'll give you an example, but I may run out of examples then. No. One example that really stuck out to me, and I think this will resonate with some people that are on this webinar today. One of them was that they wanted us to build a cell, like a mock cell for people to search in. And I thought, well, how does this, I mean, initially I'm thinking, I'm getting some feedback from the teams that are working on this. And I'm like, well, I'm really curious to see why the residents want a mock cell for people to search in, like these new staff coming in. Well, it turns out, of course, my security staff really wanted a mock cell so that people understood the importance of thorough cell searches, where residents could hide contraband to improve the safety of the facility. Residents wanted an improvement in searching because they felt like it would enhance the respect. So when someone searched their cell, they wanted to build into the training curriculum how to be respectful with someone's belongings and still search it thoroughly. So that they didn't walk in and have their cell completely destroyed every time they did a cell search every month. And so I hope that answers your question, but that's how two groups came together, came up with a really innovative idea that impacted both of them. That was low-hanging fruit. I mean, a mock search cell could be made in a closet. So yeah, hopefully that answers.
Yes, thank you. That's great. Does anybody have anything else to add on the like research skepticism, the process of participating to develop these ideas and implement changes?
Yeah, I can add just a thought on Miles. answer. And I think kind of the question I originally answered was our groundwork for building trust and that research skepticism. So I think we had less research skepticism from our incarcerated population. And I think that has to do with the researchers that we had working in the facility. We've partnered, my colleagues have partnered with the Delaware Department of Correction many times before. We had trust. People were familiar with us going in. So I think we had a little bit more buy-in from the incarcerated population, definitely less from the staff. We heard a lot from staff, you know, we've taken surveys before, nothing has happened. We also had someone, you know, tell us they would wait us out. You know, people come and go all the time. We'll wait for you to leave and the next person to come and nothing will change. So we definitely felt that challenge, and that's why we made the groundwork so strong, building that safety and confidential space for staff to begin with. But definitely after continuously showing up, I think, and being in the building and being the same person in the building, and also just being honest and having conversations with people about where we were at in the research process, you know, what was being discussed at our steering committee meetings, which our steering committee was made up of the research team, prison facility leadership, as well as Department of Correction leadership. And we were very open and honest about what conversations we were having in those meetings, why ideas or innovations maybe would work well or why they wouldn't work well. We were really transparent during that process, which I think really helped mitigate some of that research skepticism. But definitely still I don't want to answer 80 questions on the survey just because I don't want to do it. I think that happens with a lot of survey taking just as a researcher. But other than that, I think that's the research skepticism really dissipated once we built that trust and initial rapport, and we were able to have a lot more open and honest conversations after that.
And I can also add on this too, just to go off Emily's point, when it comes to the skepticism, you know, PRIN was 5 years long, a little bit over 5 years long. So in the initial phases, I really didn't see, except for people that just didn't want to answer the survey questions just because they didn't want to take the time to do it. I didn't really see any problems with skepticism, both on staff and the resident side. But as the project got longer in, so especially after 2021 and 2022, because there was 3 iterations of the surveys. And so I think everybody, both staff and residents here, were looking for, once those surveys results came out in 2022, they wanted immediate change. They saw these were the results. Okay, now we need to change something within the next week. and so what became a challenge then is that after there wasn't any initial changes right away, that began to build skepticism in both staff and the residents. And so then it kind of transformed from, so when we had further questions to answer in the latter years, then became a challenge, not really to engage. We still had the credibility and just the openness, and the people that were involved still had the ability to approach and to engage in the discussion. But then it became a question of, well, what are my answers really going to change? What difference is this going to make? And so that was kind of what we went through here.
Monier, I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit about that. Like in our interviews, we learned that trust is hard to gain and easy to lose, like you're just mentioning now. As somebody who supported the project, or I assume you support the project, could you talk a little bit more about those challenges and successes in maybe not getting them on board as you've spoken to that, but keeping them invested? Like what were some strategies that you used that worked or maybe didn't work?
Yeah, that's an excellent question when you talk about trust. So normally it's an accurate statement to say that prison is initially, and mark my word when I say initially, it can be initially a place of low trust, to gain that trust and also to keep that trust. But a lot of times trust or hope and expectations and stuff that we want to trust in, a lot of times that's just reserved just under the surface, and it's being repressed just under the surface, and waiting to like burst forth on something that just seems promising. We reserve it because we don't trust initially, but we're actually looking for something to trust in. And when Prin showed up on the scene here, initially, Prin was that something that everybody wanted to, and that they heaped a whole bunch of, and they heaped this prematurely. They heaped a whole bunch of hope and anticipation and excitement about, thinking that for sure with the big organization coming in here and doing research of this magnitude, and then coming with the results, they thought that change was just around the corner. And whether they want to admit it or not, that was kind of the air that we lived in. But later on, that trust and that anticipation and the hope and everything was just kind of lost after there was no substantive changes that resulted from the research and from the survey results. Then it was hard to keep people engaged and in the long run, and not have some skepticism or something negative to say, both about facility management, but then also about the research initiative itself.
Yeah, I think we also kind of experienced that, and I think that was really well put by Monier, being someone on the actual innovation committee. We definitely underestimated how difficult change was in an incarceration setting. We tried to not overpromise anything, and tried to be really open, like, hey, like, we are doing our best to facilitate these ideas to leadership. And we also tried our best to facilitate to our committees what leadership had said. Leadership was very open to working with us and hearing ideas and innovations. But at the end of the day, this is a prison facility, and they also had priorities that they were trying to maintain that I'm sure Miles is also able to speak on, since he's here. But so leadership was very open and willing to hear us, but then there was just some logistical things that as our facility is an urban facility, there's limited space, physical space, and a lot of our innovations started to kind of discuss these things that required additional physical space that just wasn't there. So I think that was kind of one of the barriers we were experiencing. And that can be disappointing to research participants and, committees that are really bought in and want to like be innovative and try these new things. To be told like, hey, this just isn't going to work out. So just trying to keep that momentum going and being like, okay, this isn't going to work out, but we can do this. How do we pivot without spending too much time kind of dwelling on maybe a negative or something that we were excited about that wasn't able to work out? How do we pivot and push that momentum into something that we are able to accomplish and change we were able to accomplish? I think that is kind of where that trust, the cycle of trust, I don't know if that's the right way you want to say it, but that keeping that rapport where we struggled, because we were like, okay, so we have to kind of navigate this fine line of like, this is what's able to be done versus this is what's not able to be done. How do we keep people enticed and also like wanting to move forward through kind of like these no's and these barriers or challenges?
Yeah, so I'd love to speak on this one. So I always told my friend manager was Dana Saforic. And so I always told Dana, I said, look, our best friend is a checklist. And so as soon as we started getting print-ovations, what we called them, innovations from our print advisors, as the administrator, I started writing down the things that they were asking for. I started checking them off the list. I've been in a leadership role at 3 different facilities: a reception diagnostic center, a super maximum security prison, and a medium security prison. And so I've seen firsthand just how bureaucratic and like red tape-ish prisons can be. Simple things like we need more hooks on the wall can turn into oh, well, those hooks have to be like suicide rated and they can't, and they're $500 a piece and there's no way to do that in a budget, right? So a little example, one of our innovations was that the staff wanted like a relaxation room, a place they could go to unwind if they were experienced some kind of critical incident. And they wanted like massage chairs and couches and a TV to sit back and relax in. And so obviously that stuff's expensive. It came down to, we got the massage chair, got some furniture, but it came down to the paint was awful. Like Moberly was a 1960s prison built in 1963. It had like orange carpet upstairs and this awful like drab color on the walls. And so a little example of how leadership has to roll their sleeves up and think outside the box. We literally went to Home Depot and got donated paint. It was not the right colors at all. So we looked up like trauma-informed colors. We mixed some blues and some beiges together to get this light colored blue that was calming. And we used pre-mixed paint on the walls. And so just from my experience and having been in many roles, if leaders don't feel empowered and they don't have that roll up your sleeves, get a checklist going type attitude, the things that Emily and Munir mentioned, that loss in trust and that loss in momentum can happen really quickly. And that's with any project, not just print. So I've got a few other examples of that we can talk about later on. But yeah, we didn't experience a lot of loss in trust in Missouri. And that's not saying that I don't completely understand how it happens in other places, but I just don't accept not getting stuff done. So that was the way we handled it.
Wonderful, thank you all. We've mentioned that DOCs are pretty hierarchical with a lot of top-down decision-making, red tape. How did this affect your site's experience with community engagement? Did you find opportunities for like incarcerated people to come together with staff, come together with leadership? I know, Miles, you've already mentioned those research councils. And I'm just hoping to hear from maybe Munir on this.
Yeah, so I will say this, and Emily, she kind of touched on this in her answer. So you stated this in your PowerPoint about the role of the prim, the prim manager here. So I came on with Miss Book, who's our prim manager here. And this is in summer of 2023. And by then there was a lot of skepticism and there was a lot of, obviously the red tape was, we weren't able to work through some of the red tape right there. And I thought Miss Book's role here was critical, especially for our advisory group. And so when I say some of the challenges that we faced when it came to keeping people engaged and some of the skepticism, more of that had to do with the population side of the residents and some of the staff that weren't directly involved in print itself. But as far as the advisory group itself, the staff that were committed to it and also the residents, actually our excitement grew. And I want to give that credit to Ms. Book. And the reason is she was able to, for one, she has a lot of credibility, both staff and inmate side. She has a lot of, she's an empathic person. She cares, and she's also a go-getter, and she tries to get stuff done for us. And everybody knows that up front. So, and to tell you the truth, that was my main interest when I saw her becoming the manager. That was my main interest in to be a part of print in the first place. Because I thought if anybody can get something done, she can. What she did was like shift our perspective. Yes, right now we weren't able to get some huge phenomenal changes done that both staff and residents wanted, but we made the most out of what we had. We had time together. We had time to discuss things together, to build relationships that would then the better working relationships that we had within between staff and residents and our print advisory groups could then overflow out and positively influence our community. And so that's what we used. And we also engaged in a number of different blended educational events. And so when I say blended, both staff and incarcerated residents then work together to go through a number of different educational events. One was trauma-informed care. What was the other one? The circles training, nonviolent communication, a number of different things that were hugely beneficial for us to be better assets to our peers, and just as a whole in the in our environment. Now, but as far as red tape though, we had a lot of red tape to work through. And so everything that our PRIN advisory group came up with as far as innovations and proposals and stuff like that, Ms. Book, she didn't hesitate to, crystallize that into a form that could then be presented to management. But at the end of the day, a lot of that stuff was red tape that wasn't able to be worked through. And I can't make any assumptions. I don't know why. And it's kind of helpful for me now to hear Miles's side of things as a part of prison leadership, to see that he even is aware of red tape, and because sometimes we can get negative and say, oh, they just don't want to do it, when we don't actually, we can't really realize the problems that they're going through to actually get stuff done. It's not that they don't want to, but they're experiencing challenges themselves. So we did experience, just to sum it up, we did experience a lot of those challenges. There was a lot of things that we weren't able to get past. But there was a lot of things that we did grow through, and we were just able to kind of shift our focus and get little wins and little victories. And it actually, it ended up a really good experience in the end. Sorry for talking so long.
No, thank you. Really interested to hear in what you have to say. We'll hopefully get through 2 more questions before turning to all of the questions or we're not going to answer all of the questions in the chat, but we have a lot of questions in the Q&A. So thank you all. And if you do have more questions, please feel free to put those in there as well. We learned that PRIN changed interactions between staff and incarcerated people. You all have mentioned a bit about how some of those interactions went, but this gave leaders confidence to take some calculated risks. Could you describe a little bit about the process of maybe leaning more into some of this calculated risk taking? We'll start with you, Miles.
Yeah, so calculated risk is my business. That's what we're in. I will say this. Yeah, it was tough at first to look at some of the innovations and decide that, we're going to move forward with them. I think for one, and I'll give some credit to Missouri and our administration. We're very empowering to leadership. We really want site level leadership to make decisions and move forward with ideas. And so that allowed me to do a lot at the Mobley Correctional Center. But I think an example of just like a calculated risk from an administrative standpoint, because, as an administrator, you're always worried about losing the faith of the residents and of your staff, right? People have to have faith in you and think you're going in a good direction. And so just letting PRIN run and letting things happen, there was so many innovations that, of course, there's always gonna be naysayers in corrections that people just would not care for, or would see obstacles to, or see security threats in. I think that's the biggest calculated risk that I took, is just putting faith in PRIN. Trying to remember the question here because I got a little off topic, but so changing interactions. So I felt more comfortable making those because when we got the innovation advisors together, staff and residents, the same table, and I started to see things like what I talked about earlier, which was things like they were agreeing that we needed to do better training on cell searches. I understood that if I trusted in the right people, those influencers, and I really put a lot of effort into getting some of this stuff done, that it would improve prison culture, and that the naysayers would become less. And then anytime you're trying to change a culture or improve a culture, you're going to start where it's far more comfortable for people to speak out negatively against something than it is for those people that think it's a good idea to speak up, right? There's always those shy, the people that are shyest are the ones that are positive and want to move forward with new innovative ideas. And so I feel like just seeing them work together, those tides start to change. And once you hit a point where there's more people that think it's a positive thing, that are doing the right thing and want to move forward with it, the naysayers become the ones that people are looking at like, what are you talking about? This is fine. It's all working out. So I don't know if that helps, but I think that that's just seeing that shift in dynamic, and really putting my support behind those people that I trusted to be a part of this project, help me cut through the red tape and make calculated risks.
Does anybody have anything else to add? Otherwise, we will go to a lightning round last question. Okay. If you all could give only one piece of advice to others trying to do something similar, participatory research or something PRIN-like in next time, maybe, what would it be? We can start with Emily.
Ooh, I think this is a really good reflection question to think on, and I'm gonna keep my answer brief so I don't take away from everyone else. But I think just being flexible and open, being aware that hey, this is not like a traditional research setting that we're doing work in, that this is a facility and an organization that has very specific processes that they do have to abide by. That red tape unfortunately does exist, and it's not going to go away just because we don't agree with it or don't like it. So I think the best piece of advice is just to be flexible and open and be ready to like make changes and be adaptable, and you know, go back to the drawing board when things start getting tough. So yeah, don't give up, keep moving, keep adapting.
I can go if you like. Okay, so I'm going to break the rule just a little bit. I have more than one thing, but I'll pick one at the end. So first, from an administrator standpoint, and to kind of build on what Emily said, you have to have a research team you trust. And so if you don't know Kelly Canada from School of Social Work at University of Missouri, she is phenomenal. She's partnered with us on several things, and she really understands that even though some of the things we say are a security issue may seem crazy, if she works with us and kind of allows that to be a part of the research, we get a lot more done. So have a researcher you trust, really build that relationship. And the second part is, for crying out loud, have a checklist. Like, you can't tell people that you're going to embark on this journey, and then when it comes time to start writing the check and doing things, you have administrators that don't know how to, or don't have the proper authority, or the runway to get stuff done. You have to get stuff completed, even if it's just that low-hanging fruit, like I talked about earlier. It means so much to the people involved, and it shows that you support it from the top down. So that would be the big one. Have a checklist and get stuff done.
Monier.
Okay, this is my favorite question. I'll start off with in your process evaluation report, you guys made the statement in there that despite significant societal impacts, U.S. prisons remain poorly understood institutions. To me, an institution that significantly impacts society, that also dips so deeply into both federal and state taxpayer purses, but that still remains poorly understood, is, to me, that's intolerable. And so I think like the number one thing I think that needs to be associated or as a prerequisite with any research, participatory research initiative, is anticipating the survey results and a thorough and very intentional public information and education campaign. For one, the public should be, they should understand intricately about, if they're the main funders of this, they should understand exactly what they're paying for. The intricacies of the environments that they're building for both staff and incarcerated residents, and then the results that they're getting for their investment. I think that's important, and I think that'll help. I have a lot more to add, but I think that this would be good on a few ends, mostly because sometimes, to me, a Department of Corrections will not change from the inside, whether it's resistant to change or whether it's red tape or it's because we don't have the money. But the public saying, hey, demanding change after they see the survey results and they're educated on the intricacies of prisons and how much they're paying for, I think they can cause the change that's necessary once the research goes through.
Thank you all. And I'm sure we'll get more into some of these examples and whatnot from the questions in the chat. But let me pull that up and then we can start there. One question, I will direct this first to you, Emily, and then folks can jump in if they want. How did the participatory action research approach help prioritizing the immediate needs for both staff and incarcerated people, balancing feasibility, the realities of COVID, and consider the considerable barriers of prisons? What were some quick wins around this?
Oh yeah, that's a lot. So there was a lot to it, you know, like our committee, we really leaned on our committees. We tried to compensate them as best as we could for using their thoughts, ideas, but also bringing their voice to the forefront. So, you know, me as a researcher who studies prisons, I have a lot of thoughts and ideas that I think are important for change, but I'm also not the individual that is living and working in these facilities. So letting them be driven by those committees was really important. I'm gonna give an example because I think this will help direct my answer, frame my answer. So like one of our incarcerated research committee innovations was around nutrition and physical well-being, which I think Missouri also had a similar kind of innovation. I think what we learned a lot from this was that despite location, a lot of institutions are experiencing the same challenges or areas of where they want to innovate. But we were able to make, you know, a nutritional agenda, if you will, or menu that listed the nutritional information of each food that individuals were consuming. We were able to provide a kind of like a packet on the tablets around physical well-being and different exercises you can do during the day, but not even just exercise, also like here's what a healthy cholesterol should be and different things like that, educating folks on their health and having access to resources that they may be able to kind of use in their day-to-day life, despite being kind of in this limited environment that they don't typically have too many choices over that kind of thing, was really important. And I think that was a really big a win for us that, you know, it might not seem huge, but at the end of the day, it was kind of a big deal. Staff were a little bit more challenging. We didn't realize how much more challenging it was going to be to get staff innovations across the table or across the finish line, but a lot of what staff wanted, unfortunately, we were not able to kind of give them. I had someone tell me they wanted a parking garage built for them. They wanted 8-hour shifts instead of 12-hour shifts. These are like union related issues. We unfortunately were not able to get a union rep to really come to the table with us. So we learned that not only are there barriers like within the facility and within facility leadership, but there's also barriers kind of outside, like union, public perceptions of the facility and safety and staff, those sort of things. Yeah, that's a lot, but some of our big wins were related around health and well-being. We got an elliptical on the housing unit for one of our incarcerated housing units. That was requested. They wanted more physical movement. But I think, as Miles mentioned, we couldn't just go to the local sporting goods store and buy an elliptical. It had to be, a facility safe one that didn't have parts that could be removed and could be bolted to the floor, and like all these little things that you don't really realize are red tapes and like barriers to get across until you're like in the moment. And that's why I say to be flexible and adaptable, because we couldn't just walk an elliptical through the front door of the prison and put it on the housing unit. There was all these other steps we had to do, and it required us as a research team to and our innovation manager to like step back and be like, okay, how do we make this go as smoothly as possible for everyone involved? And I think that was really important to the process. Did that answer your question?
I think so. Did anybody else want to jump in? Otherwise, we have a wealth of questions for you all. Okay. Thank you, Emily. That was a great answer. Miles, could you say something about how you navigated the ethical challenges of addressing the need for security and safety and the need for transparency, in your experience? Oh, Miles, I cannot hear you. And
How about now?
now is great.
I'm thinking on how to answer that. So, balancing safety and security, and transparency. I think what we're asking is, do you, like, obviously there's some compromises that have to be made if you want to get some things done. And maybe is that reframing the question a little bit?
There's an example was given. So one might want to give incarcerated people all relevant information about medication which they need, but in prisons this also means being aware of medication that can be used for contraband. So information versus security.
Yeah, I think transparency is your best policy. And to be completely honest with you, over my years in corrections, I've come to the realization that if you think something is a secret, it's probably not. So just specifically around that, we had an innovation recommendation that we have medical do a town hall with the residents. There's a lot of questions about medical. In Missouri, we're a contract state, so our medical is contracted out. So using that as an example, medical came, received a lot of feedback, we'll put it that way. Some good, some not so good, and they were very transparent. Obviously it was outside of litigation, it was outside of the normal grievance process. There was probably information exchanged there that typically would have been masked behind multiple, responses to grievances and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, nothing bad happened. It was just a good conversation and it built trust. And so I think when you're looking at the corrections environment, yeah, we don't want to tell people like, here's the alarm systems we use, and here's how you could best, compromise security at our facility. But at the same time, you have to realize that you're leading two groups of folks. You're leading custody staff, security staff, and you're leading residents. And to do that, they both have to have an understanding of what each other's role is and what their job is. And so I think just building a little bit higher comfort level with sharing information, and obviously being careful what you share, but, not falling short of being paranoid, I guess, is what I would recommend.
Thank you. That's great. If anybody else had anything to add, otherwise I will have Monir, I had a question for you. What are your thoughts? You mentioned it in your very first answer to a question about planning already for how PRIN was going to end when you started. But do you have any thoughts now that PRIN has been over for a little bit, how the facility can or should sustain participatory feedback or solution building structures or other innovations that were developed during PRIN, even after it has ended?
Yeah, I do. I think that, so I can say that, the old saying, where there's a will, there's a way. So I think the number one thing that any state DOCs need to do is just desire the change genuinely, and also desire to maintain those relationships that lead to real solutions that both staff and residents, that are beneficial to both staff and residents. That said, just the practicalities of that are just maintaining real relations, productive relationships with organizations like Urban, where this is kind of your mission. This is something that you initiated, because survey results, what they are today, they may change in the future. And obviously prison and any kind of environment is always, there's always dynamics to that are not the same yesterday as they are today, and won't be the same tomorrow. And so some solutions that work today won't work tomorrow. And so just being aware of that, not being satisfied with the status quo, and understanding that we have to continue to innovate and maintaining relationships with both organizations like yours, but then also different state agencies that have the same interests in like public safety, and to maintain an operational environment that's, again, both healthy for residents and also staff. The other thing, and this is this is the other thing, is I had mentioned, so when we were anticipating the end to PRIN in our facility, we came up with a proposal, and it was a it was a proposed policy change, which we wanted to, and we were calling it ARIN, which was a acronym that meant Employee and Resident Research and Innovation Network Project. We wanted to take some of what we had learned from PRIN and continue to come up with surveys, to continue to have staff and residents meet together to come up with, to improve communications, to improve the environment, and to come up with different innovations that we thought were applicable far in the future after this research this research project was over. We didn't get that proposal, ended up being turned down, so we weren't able to move forward with that. But so as a solution to that, what could continue this work on? I think internally, we should always try to build structures or an infrastructure that asks questions, to see the results of those questions, and then that is willing to make changes on the results, whether they like them or not. The last thing I'll say is this, and I think something that could sustain the participatory feedback and solution building structures developed during projects like PRIN is, I think, state laws. I think it should be codified into state law. That research is done regularly on prisons, that surveys are done regularly, that the results are then looked at by those legislative leaders, and that where changes are seen that need to be made, those changes are acted on, or those necessary changes are acted on.
Thank you for those suggestions and those thoughts. Does anybody else have anything quickly to add on the sustainability piece?
No, I'd just add, so we had our own acronym as well, Munir. We love acronyms in DOC. So we started up the Missouri Innovation Network. I got a little jacket over here, but I won't hold it up. I really like our logo. So, to Munir's point, you have to, if you find something that works, you have to try to replicate it. We still have, it gets a little bit more difficult to do research because we don't have our research partners quite as engaged because the funding has ended. However, we're still doing surveys. I think this survey-based innovation advising type model works really good. It gives you an idea, an opportunity to synthesize ideas from everybody. And so, yeah, I mean, they're still coming up with great ideas. They just came up with an idea this year we do a lot of staff onboarding. It's a huge thing in Missouri. We're really big about preparing our new hires to be successful. And the residents wanted to know why they couldn't do resident onboarding. So they're building a resident onboarding process at Mobley Correctional Center. So just little stuff like that, I think, is organically coming from this process. And so, yeah, it's important to keep going if you can make it happen. And if you're looking at implementing something like that, highly recommend it. So.
Yeah, I'll also just throw in there this something, we didn't have like a super great sustainability plan after this was over. Our state unfortunately went through a lot of leadership changes. We had 3 wardens, 3 deputy wardens, multiple commissioners, majors, all that good stuff. So we every time we would get the ball rolling, we would have an admin change, which then we would have to, bring everyone back up to speed and rebuild that trust and network, which made it challenging for sustainability. But just as an outsider coming into the facility and walking around and building these relationships with people who worked and lived there, think it's really important for institutions to have a third party or an outside party that kind of can come in and get that honest feedback and maybe start to facilitate these conversations. Because one thing I learned, and I think my research team as a whole learned, is that there still is this distrust, and I think people want to feel heard, especially correctional staff and incarcerated populations. But I think the correctional staff specifically, like, they don't feel heard by their leadership or respected in their roles sometimes. So having someone just walk around and be like, "Hey, how are you doing? What's your day like? Like, what could make your day-to-day life a little bit better?" And same for the incarcerated population, I think it seemed to make a huge difference. Well, when we look more at the data, and it'll show not differently, but like it'll show an actual story with the data. But I think that's one thing we could take away for sustainability, is having a person that's there to literally just walk around the facility and be like, what can we do? What's a way that we can keep the ball rolling? How can we be innovative? What do you need? I think that would bridge some of the legitimacy gaps that are in the facility, as well as some of these innovative areas that we're seeing discussed.
Perfect. And thank you all so much for your time and answering all of these questions. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Some of the questions that were in the chat, and I'm sure that others have, can be answered in the process evaluation report that is coming out later this month. So just a plug for that, as well as our climate survey report that'll be coming out around the same time as well. So again, thank you all for coming, and especially big thanks to our panelists. We look forward to having more conversations like this and keep doing the good work. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye.